Many people suppress their emotions due to pride, fear of rejection, or past wounds. This is one of the greatest barriers to true connection between two people. It's not that feelings don't exist, it's that they get buried under layers of defense mechanisms, past experiences, and internal struggles. The reality is we live in a world where vulnerability is often seen as weakness, especially for men. From a young age, boys are taught to toughen up, be strong, and never show too much emotion. As they grow older, this conditioning doesn't fade away. It becomes a deeply ingrained mindset, one that tells them expressing emotions makes them appear weak or dependent. And so, when a man finds himself thinking about someone, missing someone, or wanting to reach out, he often stops himself. Not because he doesn't care, not because the thoughts aren't there, but because there's something stronger holding him back: his pride. Pride is a defense mechanism. It is the mind's way of protecting itself from perceived threats. And what is the threat in this case? Rejection. The possibility of looking foolish. The risk of giving power to someone else. Many men would rather sit in silence, holding on to their emotions, than admit that someone is on their mind. They would rather suffer in their own thoughts than risk the possibility of appearing vulnerable. And yet this same pride can also be their greatest downfall. While they remain silent, they assume you will wait. They assume you will somehow know what they are feeling without them ever having to say it. They assume their actions, whether intentional or unintentional, are enough to communicate what's inside their heart. But life doesn't work that way. People are not mind readers. At the core of it, pride is rooted in fear, the fear of looking weak, the fear of getting hurt, the fear of letting go of control. The irony is that pride often leads to exactly what they fear the most: losing the person they care about. By refusing to express emotions, by choosing silence instead of honesty, they push away the very thing they want to hold on to. But the truth is, that is not your burden to carry. If someone is too proud to admit what they feel, if someone is choosing to keep their emotions locked away, that is not a reflection of you. It is a reflection of them. Now, when you find yourself dealing with someone whose pride won't let them speak, you may begin to question yourself. You may start to wonder, did I do something wrong? Am I not enough? Why won't he just say what I know he's thinking? And that's where you have to stop yourself. Their silence is not a measure of your worth. It is not an indication that you are unimportant. It is simply a sign of their own internal battle. Some people are stuck in a cycle of emotional suppression, not because they don't feel, but because they don't know how to process those feelings in a healthy way. If you look back, you'll see this pattern everywhere. How many times have you heard stories of men who lose the woman they love only to admit years later that they never stopped thinking about her? How often do you hear about people who let their pride get in the way, only to regret it when it's too late? This happens more than we realize, and the reason is simple. Pride creates a false sense of security. It convinces people that holding back is the right choice, that staying silent keeps them in control. But the only thing it truly does is build walls that are difficult to break down. So what do you do when you know someone is thinking about you but won't admit it? Do you chase them? Do you demand an answer? Do you try to break through their walls? No, because the moment you try to force someone to admit what they aren't ready to say, they pull back even more. The key is not to fight their silence, is to understand it, to recognize that their behavior has nothing to do with your value, to realize that some people need to lose something before they truly appreciate it, and most importantly, to know that you deserve someone who isn't afraid to speak up, someone who chooses honesty over pride. But let's take this a step further. Why does their silence trigger negative feelings in you? Why does it make you feel uncertain, insecure, or anxious, it's because human beings crave closure. We want clear answers. We want to know exactly where we stand. And when we don't get that, our mind starts filling in the blanks with assumptions. Maybe he doesn't care. Maybe I wasn't important enough. Maybe I should have done something differently. But these thoughts are dangerous because they are based on fear, not truth. They stem from the idea that if someone isn't expressing their feelings, it must mean those feelings don't exist. But that's not always the case. Some people will think about you every day and never say a word. Some people will miss you deeply, but let their pride keep them from reaching out. Some people will even love you, but allow their fear of vulnerability to keep them at a distance. Now, the real question is, how do you respond? Do you let their silence create doubt within you? Do you lower your standards, hoping they'll finally say what you already know? Do you spend your energy trying to break down walls that they refuse to open themselves? The answer is no. The moment you start seeking validation from someone who is too proud to give it, you hand over your power. You become trapped in a cycle of waiting, wondering, and hoping that one day they'll change. But here's what you must understand. It is not your job to fix someone's pride. Your role is not to prove your worth to someone who is too afraid to acknowledge their own feelings. Just because someone isn't expressing their thoughts or emotions toward you doesn't mean you aren't on their mind. It's easy to fall into the trap of believing that if someone isn't reaching out, if they aren't making an effort, then you must not be important to them. But that belief is built on the false assumption that people always act on their feelings. The truth is, emotions are complicated and people don't always handle them in a rational or direct way. Sometimes someone can think about you constantly but still hold themselves back from reaching out. They might replay old memories, wonder what you're doing, even feel a deep sense of longing, but their own internal fears, insecurities, or pride keep them silent. And if you don't understand this, you might start attaching your sense of self-worth to their actions, when in reality, their silence has nothing to do with your value. The mistake people make is looking for proof of their worth through external validation. They wait for a call, a message, a sign, something tangible to confirm that they are remembered, that they are important. And when that validation doesn't come, they begin to question themselves. They start wondering, was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? Am I forgettable? This is where negative feelings take root. When you begin to believe that someone else's silence is a reflection of your own value, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Your worth is not something that fluctuates based on whether or not another person acknowledges it. It is not something that disappears just because someone fails to express what they feel. The only thing their silence proves is that they are struggling with their own emotions, their own hesitations, their own pride. It has nothing to do with you. Human nature is complex. Some people suppress their emotions because they fear rejection. Others hold back because they don't want to appear vulnerable. Some are stuck in past wounds that prevent them from being open, while others simply assume that you should already know how they feel without them having to say it. The way someone behaves is a direct reflection of what's happening inside them, not a measurement of your value. You could be on their mind every single day and they still might not reach out, not because you are unimportant, but because they haven't mastered their own emotional maturity enough to act on what they feel. But here's where people make another mistake. They waste their energy trying to analyze, decode, and interpret someone else's silence instead of focusing on themselves. They sit in a loop of overthinking, replaying past conversations, trying to figure out what the other person is thinking. They start reading into social media posts, checking if they've been watching their stories, looking for hidden messages in their behavior. And what does this do? It drains their energy. It keeps them trapped in a cycle of uncertainty, seeking reassurance that they don't even need in the first place. When you truly understand your worth, you stop waiting for proof of it. You stop measuring your value by someone's ability or inability to express their feelings. You realize that whether they reach out or not, whether they admit it or not, it doesn't change who you are. Your confidence, your self-respect, your inner peace, these things should never be dependent on another person's actions. The moment you start attaching your sense of value to someone else's acknowledgement, you hand them control over your emotions. You allow their behavior to dictate how you feel about yourself. And that is the fastest way to lose your power. Think about it. How many times have you felt anxious, insecure, or uncertain simply because someone didn't give you the response you were hoping for? How many times have you overanalyzed a situation, wondering what it meant, questioning yourself, when in reality the only thing that mattered was how you chose to see yourself? The problem isn't that they aren't expressing their thoughts. The problem is that you are allowing their silence to define your own self-perception. The second you stop seeking external validation, you free yourself from this emotional roller coaster. You realize that your worth was never something that needed to be confirmed by another person in the first place. Some people will think about you and never say a word. Some will miss you but let their pride stop them from reaching out. Some will even love you but keep those emotions locked away because they are afraid to be vulnerable. But their struggles are not your responsibility. Their emotional blockages are not yours to fix. You are not here to pull words out of someone who isn't ready to say them. You are not here to lower yourself just so someone else can feel comfortable in their pride. You are here to stand in your power, knowing that your worth was never meant to be proven, it was always meant to be owned. Negative emotions have a way of creeping into your mind when you least expect them. They thrive in silence, in uncertainty, in the gaps between what you feel and what you perceive from someone else's actions. When you know someone is thinking about you but refusing to say it, it can create a whirlwind of emotions, frustration, doubt, sadness, even anger. You start questioning their intentions, wondering why they can't just be honest, why they are choosing to hold back when the truth is so clear. This is where the battle between logic and emotion begins. On a logical level, you may understand that their silence is not necessarily a reflection of your worth. You may even recognize that pride, fear, or unresolved personal issues are playing a role in their inability to express themselves. But emotionally, it still stings. It still feels like rejection, like a wound that you don't quite know how to heal. And if you are not careful, these negative emotions will start to take control, dictating your thoughts, your actions, and ultimately your sense of self. The mind has a natural tendency to seek closure when something is left open-ended, when there is no clear answer. It begins to create its own narratives to fill in the blanks. This is why silence can be so painful. It forces you to speculate, to overanalyze, to dig for meaning in places where there might not even be any. You replay old conversations. You look for signs. You try to decode body language, social media activity, even the smallest gestures, hoping to find clarity. But the more you look for answers outside of yourself, the more lost you become. Because the truth is, no amount of analysis will change the fact that someone who truly values you, someone who is emotionally mature and self-aware, will not let pride or fear get in the way of honest communication. But instead of focusing on why they won't express themselves, you have to shift your focus to why their silence is affecting you so deeply. What part of you is triggered by their lack of communication? Why does it feel personal when in reality it is their own internal struggle? The answer lies in the way you have been conditioned to seek validation from others. From a young age, society teaches you that your worth is measured by how others treat you, by how much attention you receive, by how often people acknowledge your presence. When someone pulls away, when they refuse to give you that validation, it shakes your foundation. It makes you feel as though you are being abandoned, neglected, or unimportant. But this feeling is an illusion. It is not based on truth. It is based on emotional conditioning that has trained you to look outward for confirmation of your value. Negative emotions only have power over you when you allow them to. The moment you start questioning yourself because of someone else's silence, you are giving them control over your state of mind. You are allowing their inability to communicate to dictate your happiness. But why? Why let someone's unresolved issues take up space in your heart and mind? Why allow their fears to become your burden? The answer is simple. You don't have to. You don't have to carry the weight of their emotional struggles. You don't have to sit in a cycle of overthinking and self-doubt. You have the power to break free from that pattern, to detach from their silence, and to stand firm in the knowledge that your worth is not dependent on whether or not someone else can express their feelings. The problem is, people get stuck in their emotions because they believe that feeling deeply is proof of love, that worrying about someone is a sign of caring, that waiting for them to come around is a demonstration of patience. But what if none of that was necessary? What if you could love without attachment, care without losing yourself, and be patient without putting your life on hold? The truth is, the person who is struggling to express their emotions is not your responsibility. Their journey is their own. And if they are not ready to confront their feelings, no amount of waiting, worrying, or overanalyzing will change that. You cannot force someone to be emotionally available. You cannot teach someone to value communication if they are still stuck in their own fears. And most importantly, you cannot let their silence dictate your emotional well-being. Emotions are powerful, but they are also temporary. The frustration, the sadness, the longing, these feelings will pass, but only if you allow them to. If you feed them, if you dwell on them, if you allow them to take over your mind, they will grow stronger, wrapping themselves around you like chains that keep you trapped in the past. But the moment you recognize that these emotions are simply responses to conditioning, the moment you realize that you have a choice in how you react, you reclaim your power. You shift from being controlled by your emotions to being the one who controls them. And when that happens, their silence no longer holds the same weight. It no longer dictates your happiness. It no longer makes you question your worth. Because at the end of the day, your value is not something that needs to be proven, justified, or validated by anyone else. Emotions are a powerful force. They can lift you to the highest points of joy, but they can also drag you into the deepest pits of despair. When you find yourself caught in the uncertainty of someone's silence, it can feel like an emotional battlefield inside your mind. You know they're thinking about you, you can sense it, you can feel it, but their pride, their fears, their inability to communicate holds them back from expressing it. And in the absence of words, you are left to fill in the blanks. This is where negative emotions take control, where your thoughts begin to spiral into doubt, insecurity, and overanalysis. But here's the truth. Emotions only control you if you allow them to. They only dictate your reality when you give them the power to. The biggest mistake people make is believing that just because they feel something, they must act on it. They assume that if they are hurt, they must respond. If they are anxious, they must seek reassurance. If they are sad, they must find comfort outside of themselves. But emotions, no matter how strong, do not always require a reaction. They do not always need to be validated, expressed, or acted upon. The moment you understand this, you take back your power. Because here's what happens. When you let emotions dictate your actions, you become reactive. You allow someone else's behavior to pull you in different directions. If they are distant, you chase. If they are cold, you seek warmth. If they are silent, you start questioning everything. This is where the cycle begins, where you start tying your emotions to their actions, letting their behavior determine your inner state. And that is the most dangerous place to be. When you let your emotions control you, you give away your personal power. You allow yourself to be moved by external forces rather than by your own internal stability. You become dependent on someone else's acknowledgement, on their attention, on their ability to validate what you are feeling. But what if you didn't need that validation? What if you could sit with your emotions, observe them, and choose how to respond instead of reacting impulsively? This is where true emotional mastery begins. When you realize that feelings are temporary waves passing through you, not absolute truths that define you. Just because you feel lonely does not mean you are unloved. Just because you feel rejected does not mean you are unworthy. Just because someone is not expressing their emotions does not mean they do not feel them. Your emotions are real, but they are not always rational. And the moment you separate yourself from them, you begin to regain control. The key to overcoming the emotional storm created by someone else's silence is learning how to manage your own internal world. It is about recognizing that your emotions are messages, not commands. They tell you what is happening inside, but they do not have the authority to dictate your actions unless you give them that power. Most people do not realize this. They assume that emotions must be obeyed, that feelings of sadness or frustration must be indulged, that anxiety must be soothed by external validation. But when you operate this way, you become a slave to your emotions, constantly chasing relief instead of cultivating inner peace. The truth is, emotions will pass if you allow them to. They will settle if you do not feed them. And the way you stop feeding them is by shifting your focus away from the person who triggered them and back onto yourself. What you focus on grows. If you spend your time analyzing their silence, wondering what they are thinking, replaying past conversations, you are keeping yourself stuck in an emotional loop that only drains you. You are giving them space in your mind that they are not even aware of. And the more you do this, the more power they hold over you. But if you shift your focus, if you bring your energy back to yourself, to your goals, to your personal growth, something powerful happens. The emotions lose their grip. The frustration begins to fade. The sadness starts to dissolve. Because instead of feeding them, you are replacing them with something greater. You are pouring into yourself instead of into a situation you cannot control. And that is the ultimate key to emotional freedom. Learning to redirect your energy toward what serves you rather than what drains you. Most people do not struggle because of what happens to them. They struggle because of how they respond. It is not the situation that creates suffering. It is the meaning you assign to it. If you believe that someone's silence is a form of rejection, you will feel rejected. If you believe that their inability to communicate means you are not important, you will feel But if you change the meaning, if you realize that their behavior is a reflection of their own inner struggles and not a measurement of your worth, then the emotional grip weakens. You begin to see things clearly. You recognize that their silence has nothing to do with you. And in that realization, you take back the power that was never meant to be given away in the first place. There is a profound shift that happens when you realize that emotional pain is often not caused by the situation itself, but by your attachment to it. When someone is thinking about you but refuses to express it, their silence creates a void, an unanswered question that lingers in your mind. And in that space of uncertainty, negative emotions begin to grow. The longer you dwell on it, the more it consumes you. You start overanalyzing every interaction, searching for meaning in their actions, trying to decode what is going on inside their mind. But the truth is, no matter how much you think about it, no matter how many conclusions you come to, you will never truly know unless they choose to express it. And this is where people get stuck in the cycle of trying to find answers where none exist. The human mind is designed to seek closure. When something is left unresolved, the brain will create its own explanations to fill in the gaps. If someone is silent, you might assume they don't care, that they have moved on, that you were never important to them in the first place. But these assumptions are often rooted in fear, not reality. The mind takes the lack of communication and turns it into rejection, into abandonment, into proof that you were never valued. But what if that was not the truth? What if their silence was not about you at all? What if it was their own internal struggle, their own pride, their own fears, keeping them from reaching out? And more importantly, why does their inability to express their feelings hold so much power over your emotional state? It is because you have been conditioned to believe that another person's acknowledgement determines your worth. From childhood, you are taught to seek validation outside of yourself. Approval from parents, acceptance from peers, recognition from society. All of these external sources shape the way you view yourself. And when someone pulls away, when they remain silent despite the connection you know exists, it triggers that old conditioning. It makes you feel as though you need their validation to feel whole again. But this is where the illusion must be broken. Because the truth is, no one outside of you has the power to determine your value. No one's silence, no one's absence, no one's inability to express themselves has the authority to define who you are. The only person who can give you that power is you. When you stop seeking closure from another person and start creating it within yourself, you take back control of your emotions. You no longer wait for an apology, for an explanation, for a sign that they still care. You no longer sit in the energy of waiting, hoping, wondering. Instead, you make a decision. You decide that their silence is enough of an answer. You decide that you do not need verbal confirmation to know that you are worthy. You decide that whether they speak or not, whether they reach out or remain distant, you will not allow their choices to dictate your emotional well-being. And this decision is what separates those who suffer from those who rise above. The reason many people struggle with negative emotions is because they resist them. They fight against them, trying to force themselves to feel differently, trying to suppress the sadness, the frustration, the longing. But emotions are not meant to be fought. They are meant to be understood. When you feel sadness, instead of trying to push it away, ask yourself, what is this emotion teaching me? When you feel frustrated, instead of letting it consume you, ask, what belief is being challenged right now? The moment you approach emotions with curiosity instead of resistance, they begin to lose their hold on you. Because emotions at their core are just signals. They are not enemies. They are messengers, guiding you toward deeper understanding, toward personal growth, toward healing. But the problem is, most people do not allow themselves to feel. They either suppress their emotions, pretending they do not exist, or they indulge in them, allowing their feelings to dictate their every thought and action. Neither of these approaches leads to freedom. True freedom comes when you acknowledge your emotions without letting them control you. When you recognize that sadness is just an experience, not a permanent state. When you understand that longing for someone's words does not mean you need them to survive. When you see that their silence, no matter how frustrating, is not a reflection of your worth, but rather a reflection of their own internal struggles. This is how you break free from emotional suffering. Not by forcing feelings away, but by changing the way you interact with them. Instead of focusing on what they are not saying, focus on what you are telling yourself. Instead of wondering why they cannot express their emotions, ask yourself why their lack of expression has such a strong effect on you. Every time you place your emotional stability in someone else's hands, you give away a part of your power. But the moment you reclaim it, the moment you decide that your happiness, your peace, your confidence will not be dictated by someone else's ability to communicate, you become untouchable. Because at the end of the day, the most powerful thing you can do is not wait for someone else to validate what you already know. You are enough, with or without their words. Silence is one of the most powerful tools a person can use. It can be a form of control, a method of self-preservation, or even a way to mask vulnerability. When someone is thinking about you but refuses to reach out, their silence speaks volumes. But here's the challenge. Most people do not know how to interpret silence correctly. They assume it means rejection, indifference, or a lack of care. And because of this assumption, they let their emotions spiral into negativity, creating stories in their minds that may not even be true. The real problem, however, is not their silence. It is your reaction to it. It is the emotional weight you place on their lack of communication. And the key to overcoming the negative feelings that come with their silence is learning how to detach, how to stop waiting, and how to regain control over your own emotional state. The first thing you must understand is that their silence is not about you. It is about them. It is about their own struggles, their own fears, their own ego that won't let them speak. But because humans have a natural tendency to internalize external behavior, you make it about yourself. You wonder if you did something wrong. You question whether they ever cared at all. You start dissecting every past interaction, trying to find clues, trying to make sense of why they won't say what you already know they feel. And this is the trap, the endless loop of overthinking that leads to unnecessary pain. Because the truth is, no matter how much you analyze, you will never find the answer you are looking for. The only person who can explain their silence is them. And if they are not willing to do that, then you must stop searching for explanations that may never come. One of the most powerful lessons you can learn in life is how to stop waiting for closure. The reason silence hurts so much is because it leaves things unfinished. It leaves the door open for hope, for speculation, for endless mental loops that never lead to real answers. But here's what most people don't realize. You do not need their words to find closure. You can give yourself the closure you are looking for. You can decide that their silence is all the answer you need. You can choose to interpret it as a sign to move forward rather than a reason to stay stuck in emotional turmoil. But this requires a shift in mindset. It requires you to stop focusing on them and start focusing on yourself. Detachment is not about not caring. It is about caring about yourself more. It is about recognizing that your emotions should not be dependent on another person's ability to communicate. It is about realizing that waiting for them to acknowledge their feelings only keeps you stuck in a place of emotional dependence. The moment you decide to stop waiting, the moment you stop expecting them to say what you already know, you free yourself from the chains of emotional limbo. You take back your power. And when you do this, something incredible happens. The negative feelings begin to fade. The frustration, the sadness, the confusion, they lose their grip on you because you are no longer feeding them with your attention, no longer giving them life by obsessing over what they are not saying. People who struggle with detachment often believe that if they let go, they are admitting defeat. They think that walking away from the emotional investment means they never truly cared. But this is not true. Letting go is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. It means you have reached a level of emotional maturity where you no longer need external validation to feel at peace. It means you have chosen to prioritize your own well-being over the endless cycle of seeking answers that may never come. And when you reach this place, you become untouchable. Their silence no longer has power over you. Their inability to communicate no longer dictates your emotions. You become centered, grounded, in control of your own reality. This is where true freedom lies. Not in getting them to say what you want to hear, but in realizing you do not need to hear it. Not in waiting for their acknowledgement, but in giving yourself permission to move forward regardless. And when you do this, when you fully step into this mindset, you begin to see things clearly. You begin to recognize that their silence was never about you to begin with. You begin to understand that people act from their own fears, their own insecurities, their own internal struggles. And once you see this, you stop taking it personally. You stop letting it affect your self-worth. Because at the end of the day, the only validation you truly need is the one you give yourself.